Deine Tochter. Steirer Freund ist mein sehr, sehr größer Kohle und Vergnügen, euch vorzustellen. Zwei schöne jiddische Lehrerinnen von Australien. Das einzige Land auf der Welt, wo wohnen Koalas. Das einzige Land, das einzige Land auf der Welt, wo es funktioniert, tagtäglich, every day, eine jiddische säkuläre Schule, wo es Reisel und ein arbeiten dort. So it's really my pleasure. I was so surprised when we get a month plus registration from 2 people from Australia. And I'm thrilled that you're here. And not only they came to learn, they also came to teach. They teach Australian football, and tomorrow is a presentation game. 8 o'clock, we'll try to put up chairs so you can Australian football in Yiddish. So if you're not asleep, I think it's just kidai to check it out. 8 a.m. 8 a.m. Without further information, yeah. So we are watched all over, and it's a pleasure. Please.
Before we begin, it's customary in Australia to begin all of our public meetings by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of the land where we're meeting. For example, where we live in Melbourne, we would acknowledge the Bund people of the Kulin Nation, and in so doing, we show respect to the original inhabitants of the land where we meet, and we acknowledge and respect those who came before us. This is rooted in First Nations traditions. So in keeping with this tradition, we would like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered here today, the Wapinga and Lenape peoples, I hope I said that correctly, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Wir anerkennen die traditionelle Abhüter von dem Land, wo wir treffen sich, die Wapinga und Lenape Völker von dem Land, und wir geben noch Covid sehr Imes und Aves von dem Abwehr, von dem Heute und Zukünftige.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board flight QF94 with service from New York to Yerushalayim de Australia. We ask that you please fasten your seatbelts at this time and secure all baggage underneath your seat or in the overhead compartments. We also ask that your seats and table trays are in the upright position for takeoff. Please turn off all personal electronic devices, including laptops and mobile phones. Smoking is prohibited for the duration of the flight. Thank you for choosing Qantas.
Okay, obviously, you all know now I'm Razel Zilberman.
And I'm Einat Oba.
And we're both Yiddish and Jewish Studies teachers at Shalom College in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also the Director of Jewish Studies and Languages, or we would say LOTE, languages other than English, at the college.
So today we're going to share with you a few highlights and a little bit of the history of Yiddish Melvin. Of course, we don't have time for everything today, so we'll be focusing more on the secular Yiddish life that takes place in Melbourne, and hopefully you'll be a bit inspired and you'll come and visit us in Melbourne.
So before we begin, we'd like to give you a little background on the context of how Yiddish found a home in Melbourne, Australia. So it's important to note that the earliest Jewish arrival in Australia was in 1776, when the first fleet with convicts on board arrived in Australia. And there were 8 confirmed Jewish convicts, although there were possibly more. It's a bit contended. And of course, while whilst white settlers in Australia declared the land terra nullius, we know obviously there were First Nations peoples that inhabited the land well before us. And the Jewish population in Australia grew over time. And that included due to the famous gold rush that happened in Ballarat in Victoria, where we live. Prior to the beginning of Eastern European Jewish migration to Australia in the 1890s, the Melbourne Jewish community largely consisted of what is commonly referred to as Anglo-Jews. And by World War I, the Jewish population in Melbourne had largely adopted this British Australian culture. But then what happens is in the 1920s, roughly 2,000 Jews arrive in Melbourne from Poland. During that period, there's an increasing separation between the previously settled Anglo-Jews and the Eastern European Jewish migrants. For the new arrivals, for those Eastern European Jewish migrants, the lack of cultural Jewish expression by these Anglo-Jews was just perplexing. For them, Jewish cultural expression was essential to their Jewish life. And that was a reflection of the communities in which they had grown up in Eastern Europe, where involvement in Jewish institutions, events, and even speaking a Jewish language acted as an expression of their Jewishness, a form of Jewish cultural identity rather than Judaism as a form of religious identity. As you'll see on the screen, as Melbourne Bund leader and general cultural activist Sender Burston wrote in 1967, this is a translation, the big national and social ideas that engulfed the Jewish people in Eastern Europe, in Russia and Poland at the end of the 19th century were carried here being Australia, with the stream of Jewish immigration. And we know there was a big difference in the makeup of the Jewish community in Melbourne and in Sydney. And this is also important for the context of why Melbourne has such a strong Yiddish-speaking community. Whilst Victoria attracted Russian and Polish Jews prior to 1939, we know that in the same period, New South Wales, which is where Sydney finds itself, they attract about 3 times as many immigrants from Hungarians, Czechs, Germans, Lithuanians, and Romanians. So it's a different community makeup. The Eastern European Jewish migrants who arrived in Melbourne just prior to and after the Holocaust were infused with a renewed sense that involvement in communal life was essential to being Jewish. Again, they had grown up in these active Jewish communities and they wanted to build replicas of these communities here in Australia. Malcolm Turnbull, who actually ended up becoming a prime minister of our country, notes that on the eve of World War II, Jewish migrants who arrived in 1939 reflected the identity of many new arrivals who were, this is a quote, generally imbued with European culture and experienced in organizational politics. And that's also very important. And it was within that kind of community that Yiddish Melbourne would further blossom.
Okay, so if you've lucked out and you're sitting next to the window on the right-hand side of the plane, you'll soon see us flying over the Kadima Jewish Cultural Centre and National Library, which has been in existence since 1911. So you can see that early influx of Jews came in and they established it. So it was the first secular Jewish cultural and Yiddish organisation in Australia. And its first home was actually just down the street from the Victorian Parliament in central Melbourne. So it was really right in the middle of town. It moved around a little bit and now is right near our school in Elstonwick, which is out of the city, but not that far away. and closer to more of the Jewish population. The founders were predominantly recently arrived immigrants, Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia trying to escape the old world pogroms and everything else that was going on at the time. Over the years, the Kadima became a centre for cultural activity in Melbourne. They published the first ever Yiddish book in Australia, Der Australische Almanach, the Australian Almanac, in 1937. And then there's also been all sorts of theatre activity over the years, even travelling around to different places and showing these productions around Australia and even a couple internationally. So we had, in the early days, there was an older theatre group that was the David Hellman Theater, Kadima. And then there was the Melbourne Yiddish Youth Theatre. So you can see in the pictures, that one's the David Hellman, and this is the younger ones. Some of you might recognise a very young Frady Morotsky from today we have lots of different things going on at the Kadima. There are adult Yiddish classes, there's a library that's got amazing Yiddish resources. They have lots of different Yiddish theatrical productions, musicals. Last year, Kadima staged Yentl and actually won a number of awards for that. And that was done at the National Theatre in Melbourne. So on a bigger stage than just for the Jewish community. This was followed this year by a really interesting production called Yiddish Divas Into the Red Tent. So that's the divas.
The divas of Melbourne. So in the midst of this is mine, yeah. So in the midst of the growing Melbourne Jewish community, whose growth was influenced by those Eastern European arrivals, the Melbourne Bundesgruppe, die Bundische Gruppe, was founded in 1928 by a group of Bundist immigrants. The formation of the Bund as a formalized organization coincided with the creation, and if anyone knows the history of the Bund in general, this will be familiar, of the Weltkoordinierkomitee von Bund, the World Coordinating Committee of the Bund in 1947, which encouraged the formalization and links between world Bund movements. And as Sender Besten, who we mentioned before, wrote in 1951, the Melbourne Bund evolved from the Bundische Gruppe to die Bundische Organisation in Melbourne, meaning the Bund organization in Melbourne. I mention this only because it's important to note that this Bund is the only existing Bund organization in the world with continued ties directly back to the Weltkoordinierkomitee von Bund. Post-war migration ensured that the Bund in Melbourne continued to grow, not just in membership, but in activities and auxiliary organizations that it oversaw. The Bund had its own periodical, Unser Gedanke, our point of view or our thoughts, which was first published in October of 1947. Another auxiliary organization of the Bund was the Zukunft movement, which will be familiar again to people who know about the history of the Bund in general. That began in 1950 and was for people aged roughly 14 and up. And another very important continuing Bund activity that started in 1950 was the establishment of the Skiff Youth movement in Melbourne. And that's been a key contributor to the Bund's continuity in Melbourne as well. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Many Bundists were active in the Jewish Welfare Society, which was officially established in 1939 and helped new migrants to settle in Australia. And that was just one of many Jewish community organizations in Melbourne in which the Bund played and continues to play a key role, including organizations like the Kadima we mentioned before, the Yiddish Sunday schools, which we'll speak about in a moment, and later Shalom College. Now, if you look outside the window, you'll see the wax house, the building out of which the Bund operates, named for Bundist Jacob Wax. The Bund has remained politically, before I switch slides, I do just want to make note of two things in these pictures. The first is this picture from Unser Gedank, which does feature Sender Bullstein in it. And the other is actually one of our beloved Chaverim who's still living in Melbourne, Abram Goldberg, a Bund member. And you can see the picture of him when he was younger. He came from Lodge. He's now living in Melbourne, and his Einikul is on the Bund committee. So this speaks to the continuity that we'll talk about in a moment. Oh, wrong one.
And his daughter is the principal of our school.
Yes. So the Bund has remained politically and culturally active in Melbourne since its establishment. As the Jewish community has well and truly flourished in Melbourne, the Bund has maintained a broad focus on not just workers, but those facing other injustices. And a perfect example of this are the ongoing efforts of the Bund in actively fighting for the rights of asylum seekers, which remains a big issue in Australia. And as a recent example, the campaign to enshrine a First Nations voice to Parliament in our Constitution. Some of the activities of the Bund today include lectures, workshops, cultural events, the annual April 19th Warsaw Ghetto Uprising commemoration. You can see a little picture up there from this year with our Attorney General in the middle there, and also a former Skiff Youth, Josh Burns, who's now a Member of Parliament, the tall one in the back. But also the Bonavina Memorial Lecture, YouTube specials such as podcasts. You can see Shane's special edition there. And the half-baked Bund history cooking sessions and more. If you haven't watched it, it's worth a watch.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel ties in cooking with Bund history. And if you want to know how one can possibly do that, watch them.
Okay. And he's a good cook too.
He's a good cook too. Yeah. So the Jewish Labour Bund also runs many secular left-wing Yiddish activities, including events marking Yom Tovim. You'll see on the screen a Bundische Yom Kippur event, which happens every year. The Bund hosts its own digital archive, which is available to Bund members. So please go have a look. There are some interesting treasures on there if you'd like to sign up. And I'd also like to specifically note a new project, the Chana Maraki Memorial Mentorship, which started just this year, in which members of the community apply to participate in a mentorship program in order to develop Yiddish art, complementing and supporting Bundes values and themes. So the inaugural mentorship was held last year with Daniel Kahn as the mentor and Joanna Goldman as the recipient. And together they developed 2 brand new songs, which you can hear on Joanna's YouTube page if you search Joanna Goldman.
And they're beautiful songs.
They're fantastic.
They're amazing.
Sorry, we'll come back to that. Melbourne's Yiddish Choir, Milkumen on Yiddish Choir, about which I'm very passionate, also runs
Hazel's baby.
under the auspices of the J-Wax Cultural Centre I mentioned before, Wax House. Founded in June 2008, it meets weekly to learn Yiddish songs, including a repertoire of Bundesworkers and left-wing songs. And we perform publicly throughout the year. You can see some images there actually from the In One Voice Festival, which we'll speak about later. The Jewish Labour Bund is celebrating its 95th year of life in Australia this year, and there's a lot to celebrate. The current Bund committee is over 60% under the age of 45, which it's a little blurry, but you can see them over there. And another source of pride for the movement is the continued success of the Skiff Youth group, about which I'll speak a little bit. Yeah, I'll talk about them now. So Skiff, meaning Sozialistischer Kinderverband or Socialist Children's Union, was established in Melbourne in 1950, continuing in the tradition of the Skiff youth movement that was established in Poland in 1926. So today, Skiff holds weekly activities on Sundays and 3 camps a year, a winter and a summer camp for all Skiffisten and a spring camp for senior Skiffisten. And at these activities and camps, Skiffisten learn about Skiff's ideologies in fun and engaging ways. Skiff continues to promote the ideas of Chaverschaft, the movement's democratic socialist ties, Yiddishkeit and Deutschkeit, and encourages the young children aged 8 to 18 to take on the responsibility of continuing and ideally enacting those ideas. Skiff continues to publish its own magazine, Chaverschaft, for the Skiffisten, which first began being printed in the 1950s. It also co-presents the annual In One Voice in Ein Kol Jewish Community Festival, which you'll see in the middle on the screen there, which celebrates Jewish life in Melbourne together with the Kadima. They co-sponsor that event. And that festival, which features musical performances, community stalls, a makers market, food and more, attracts thousands of people each year.
Jews and non-Jews.
Yeah.
Come, yeah.
Importantly, and I want to stress this, the young people that run Skiff, and in fact, everybody involved in the Jewish Labour Bund for that matter, but the young people that run Skiff, the Skiff Helfer, are all volunteers, which speaks to their personal commitment to the movement, but also encourages them to remain involved in the movement well beyond the time that they leave Skiff. The Skiffisten and Helfer learn to become future leaders of not only the Yiddish community, but in broader circles. I mentioned Josh Burns before, Josh Burns MP, I should say, Member of Parliament, who actually was a former Skiff Vorsitzender, head of Skiff, and now sitting in our federal parliament. We have Yiddish musicians, various fields all coming through this organisation as well.
And doing amazing work at our school too.
Yes. So given the continuity of the Bund in Melbourne, children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Bundisten are involved in Skiff and the Bund, and the success and continuity of the Jewish Labour Bund in Eck-Welt is thanks to the considered efforts of Chaverim, who moved to Melbourne to start a new life. They saw the importance of building bridges between the past and the present.
Okay, so the roots for secular Yiddish schools in Melbourne can be found in a letter that was sent to Sender Burston, and we talked about, in 1935. The letter was from the Yiddish writer Melech Ravitch. Those of you who are working with Sheva, we're reading Melech Ravitch's work. So he was writing from Hong Kong to inform Sender Burston that he would soon be arriving in Melbourne. Melech Ravitch will be familiar to those. So some of you who may not have studied with Sheva, you might like to have a look at some of his things, but it's a nice Australian connection. Upon his arrival in Melbourne at a meeting at the home of J. Ginzel on the 1st of October in 1935, Melech Ravitch clarified his intention not to return to Poland due to rising anti-Semitism, and he proposed opening a Yiddish Sunday school where he would teach in order to earn wages. The Friends of the Yiddish Schools in Poland called for an open meeting at the Kadima. At this meeting, a new committee was formed to proceed with planning the opening of the Sunday school, and the school opened its doors on November 3rd, 1935. One of the most important advancements in Yiddish education in Melbourne was the arrival of Yosef Giligich.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I just want to stress what Aina is about to say. This was the New York Times article, which I know a lot of people read, was fantastic. And we're so grateful to Natasha for the work she did on that article. But of course, there are a lot of things that couldn't be included in that article. And we will touch on a lot of those things today. One of those very important things, or very important people, is the person that Aina is going to speak about now.
Yeah. Who's also family. Giligich had been sent to Melbourne by Tzisho in Warsaw to raise funds for the Medem Sanatorium. By the end of the appeal in 1938, he had already secured a visa to go to manage the Yiddish schools in Toronto. Even though the salary he was offered to stay in Melbourne as the principal of the Sunday school was lower than in Toronto, he agreed to stay in Melbourne as principal. And he remained the principal of the Sunday school for almost 30 years. It was at his suggestion that the school was named the E.L. Peretz Shul. Giligich was a trained educator who had studied at the Vilna Teachers Seminary. Perhaps most importantly, Giligich set up a Yiddish teachers course in 1947 with 6 of these courses conducted. The course ran for 2 hours per week for 2 years, plus Sunday morning classes as practical teaching experience. This course prepared a whole generation of Australian Yiddish teachers. In 1950, they opened a kindergarten, which was run by Slova Christa. short. In 1961, the school had 262 students, which was huge. The E.L. Peretz Shul ran for many years, but faced many challenges. Jews gradually moved south of the Yarra River. So we said Kadima started sort of closer to the city, which is much further north, and then moved later. So this was happening all over the place. And they moved towards a suburb called St Kilda. Those of you who've met our Aussie on staff, Joe, he lives in St Kilda, which saw a drop in numbers to 70 students in 1970. Joseph Gilligich also retired in 1970. With enrolments continuing to fall, in 1984, the E.L. Peretz Shul and kindergarten were absorbed into Shalom College, which brings us to Shalom College.
So as we mentioned, obviously there was a big move from north of the Yarra, as we call it, to south of the Yarra. And that saw a need for Yiddish education in that St Kilda area, which is where the college finds itself now, not in St Kilda, but around that area. So the Shalom Aleichem Sunday School was opened on May 5th, 1946 in that south of the Yarra area. Yasha Shel, who is actually the son-in-law of Yosef Gilligich, about whom we spoke just before, was the first principal. And the Shalom Aleichem Kindergarten was established in 1952 with Genya Wasserman as its director. And if you're looking at the screen, you'll actually see two wonderful pictures of Genya Wasserman. On this side, it's the right-hand side, on the top, on the far right, and on the bottom photo, she's actually the lady on the left. The one on the right is actually my Bubba.
And my kindergarten teacher.
So by 1960, it had over 200 students across 11 classes. And the Yiddish Sunday schools together across the E.L. Peretz School and the Shalom Aleichem School presented a range of cultural events, including Jewish festivals and commemorations, Third Seder, Purim parades, Warsaw Ghetto Uprising commemorations, as well as concerts and plays based on the works of Yiddish writers. And they also had school choirs that would perform publicly. And many of those traditions are actually continued today at Shalom Aleichem College. So how do we get from there to a Jewish day school? In 1974, Bundist activist Nachman Griffenberg headed a group with the aim of establishing a Yiddishist day school. And the purpose would be to promote Yiddish language and culture and would ensure that Yiddish education would always be accessible in Melbourne. And it would be a secular Jewish day school. This school, Shalom Aleichem College, was opened in February of 1975 with just 10 students. And the first principal of the day school was Doris Burston. Now, over the years, the school has, or the college, I should say, has only continued. I do want to mention before the next shtick, this article always seems to attract attention on this side of the world because of the first line. Melbourne has achieved what New York could not, a Yiddish day school, said Nathan Griffenberg. Or we should say not yet. So given my own personal connections to the school, I will note, as I said before, my Bubba Mire Zilberman was the directress of the kindergarten for many years, following on from Genya Wasserman, both of whom are in the bottom photo, and was a member of the college council for many years. And my mother, Bobby Zilberman, was also a Yiddish and Jewish studies teacher at the college and was the director of Yiddish and Jewish studies as well. So third generation, part of the furniture. So what does the college look like today? And I know this is the part you've all been waiting for. We'll come back to that. So we'll take a look outside the window. Shalom Aleichem College's values continue to be heavily influenced by those of the Seashore system, the secular Yiddish school system, Seashore of Eastern Europe, and are referred to as a Lebensstege, values for a lifetime. All of these values aim to teach children to be mentioned. In fact, one of our student awards is actually called the Honorable Mention Award. So the college is not just a school, it provides a Yiddish education to children from infancy we should say the college community provides Yiddish education from infancy to high school. So the Early Learning Center, which begins from 2 years old, offers daily Yiddish classes, with Yiddish also being integrated into the general studies curriculum. The primary school offers daily Yiddish classes from prep, which is 5 years old, all the way to grade 6, which is about 12 years old. And the students graduate from the school being able to read, write, and speak, but write lengthy pieces in Yiddish. And we hope we even teach them to dream in Yiddish. Jewish studies classes are also conducted using Yiddish and using Yiddish texts. As well as that, and this is why we say college community, we also run a Yiddish playgroup called Shalom Aleichem Shabbos for infants to about 3 years old. And this is a Shabbos Simcha, which we hold on Fridays, where parents and guardians and babas and zaydas and little ones come along to sing to Yiddish nursery rhymes and songs and have Shabbos Simcha together. Now, as well as that, not at Shalom Aleichem College, but on the site where Shalom Aleichem College is, we have a separate, it's called a non-school senior secondary provider, Shalom Aleichem College Community Education Center, or for short, we'll call it SACHEC, which has high school classes and adult Yiddish classes. And the high school students are currently enrolled from years 7 to 11. So right up until they finish school. And then, as I said, also adult students as well. These high school students are graduates of the college who have gone on to high school, and they come back after school to study Yiddish with us. So apart from general studies, Yiddish is the second most frequent subject taught in the college. This means that students develop strong relationships with their Yiddish teachers, and Yiddish naturally blends into all areas of the school. So I know there are a few people here who have managed to come visit. The signs around the school are all in Yiddish and English. Yiddish displays can be seen in every classroom. Greetings from the college, if you're on our mailing list, sent in Yiddish and English. The students also show great pride in their house teams, which are named after Avram Reisen, Kadja Molodovsky, Mani Leib, and E.L. Peretz, the Yiddish writers. And of course, they love the namesake of our school, Shalom Aleichem. And each year, our college holds a birthday celebration for Shalom Aleichem. And on that day, students dress up as Shalom Aleichem and his characters. And one of our teachers always dresses up as Shalom Aleichem and visits the students as the writer himself. So the Yom Tovim are celebrated from a secular perspective. As we said, it's a secular Jewish day school, focusing on the Jewish people and on Yiddish culture. On top of learning grammar and vocabulary, students learn a range of Yiddish poetry, songs, and literature. For example, our grade 4 students very often read and then perform Die Dame mitten Hintel, and I have to say, inspired by Shane Baker's Vodafone video of that poem. Our students also perform their school concert every year in Yiddish, Hebrew, and English. We also teach Hebrew at the college. And the anthem of the school is the Shul hymn, which can also be heard in the documentary Milko Menon, if anyone has seen it. The documentary about the Medem Sanatorium. We'll just hear a quick clip of their version and then a quick clip of our version.
Richtig. Mendele hat sein ganz Leben geträumt wegen einer solchen Schule wie unsere. Die jiddisch-weltliche Schule ist euch ein Jerusche von Mendelen. Wollen wir singen ein Lied zu der jiddischen Schule, was wir sagen, wenn uns das euch daje. Wollen wir singen mit Freude und mit Augen und Fuß, euer Held, aber Freude nahe. Unser Schul, unser Mann, das Kind, dieser Freude.
Okay, we'll now pause there. I will just point out one slight difference in Milkomenon. You'll hear unser Schul von einem Arbeiterkind. We sing unser Schul von einem Yiddischen Kind because we can't necessarily connect to Arbeiter class. I don't know. Also, we don't usually have Skiff t-shirts in the back of our school videos, but this was a video we prepared for Zalman Malatek for his birthday. So in an increasingly tech-focused world, our dedicated Yiddish teachers are learning tech-savvy ways to create Yiddish resources that reflect the needs of our modern-day students. We utilize various educational apps and other programs like Yiddish Pub. The majority of our educational tools are made by our teachers using elements from older resources. But I do want to quickly mention this book on the right here with the very smiley, happy child who received their first ever Yiddish workbook. This is a new Yiddish workbook that's been printed this year, created by one of our teachers, Devorah Zilberman, thanks to a scholarship provided through the school, who happens to be my sister. I'm not biased. With the graphic design also by another former student of the college, Daniel Goldberg, who actually was in one of our photos before, a beautiful new Yiddish workbook for the children to use. So we are, and hopefully it will be available at some point to the rest of the world as well, but we really are working to create beautiful resources that can support our students' learning. So it's not lost on us that this college is not only the crown jewel of our Yiddish community, but of the utmost importance in worldwide Yiddish education for young people. And we're also so fortunate to be able to come to work and do what we do every single day, following in the footsteps of those who taught us when we too were students at Shalom College.
Yeah, special place. Okay. So Melbourne also has a strong history of Yiddish radio, and today there are several radio programs in the Yiddish language in Melbourne. So if you look outside this window, you might see Yiddish program on Radio 3ZZZ every Sunday at 11 a.m. till noon, Australian Eastern Standard Time, I should say.
They don't know Z in this country.
Sorry, Z, 3ZZZ. This is broadcast in FM,
whole bunch of different digital forms, but more importantly online.
Online and on podcast, so you can get it through those different ways. And there's also a news bulletin of Jewish headlines in Yiddish, which is broadcast by podcast every Sunday at 10 a.m. So that's also done by Radio 3ZZZ. Radio 3ZZZ is based in Melbourne and is Australia's largest multicultural community radio station, and has between 300,000 and 400,000 listeners each week on average, which is pretty big for radio.
Across the station, we should say.
Yeah, across the station, yeah. It has been broadcasting for over 30 years, and it operates 24 hours a day in over 60 languages for about 52 different communities. The Yiddish program is an entertainment program consisting of Yiddish stories, comedy, poems, songs, and news in Yiddish. And the program is run by volunteers. The main broadcasters are Bobby and Michael Zilberman, Hazel's parents. Yiddish. There's also a Yiddish segment on SBS Radio, which is the special broadcasting service. This is a small segment that's presented by another former teacher from Shalom Aleichem Shul, Alex Daphna. There's also some narrowcast broadcasts. That means a low power transmission that you can get on
limited range.
Yeah, transmitter. And on there's a Jewish radio station called J-Air, and there are 2 Yiddish programs each week on J-Air. One is presented by the Kadima in Melbourne by Alex Daphna, and the other program, Amol and Heint, which is presented by the Jewish Labour Bund in Melbourne.
So
It's accessible.
yes, if you Google these, they will come up. Yeah.
So you can see, J-Air, and you can see the different things that are there.
Let's go back a step.
Mhm.
So through the other window, you'll see the Penina Zilberman Yiddish Cultural and Educational Foundation, which was established in memory of Penina Zilberman, my sister, who passed away in Melbourne at the age of 9 years old and dreamed of being a Yiddish teacher. The foundation works to provide a bridge for young generations to enjoy Yiddish culture through various projects and activities. And they also provide prizes and encouragement for young students to undertake Yiddish cultural studies at primary and secondary schools. And you can see, we've had a mistake on our slide. We're looking only at the middle picture. The other two are the Shalom College photos. But you can see one of our happy students in the middle with their prizes.
With all their prizes, yeah, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so we now see Yiddish Australia, which was established in 2004, and this was in order to promote Yiddish language use in Australia. So the organisation aims to support the vibrant Yiddish-speaking community by organising and presenting immersive Yiddish activities and events in Yiddish and providing opportunities for individuals to speak in Yiddish. These many activities include our annual Yiddish Softbach Australia, which you can ask Shane about, and Deb and Jeff have also come, a few other people. So if you want to know a bit more about that. And you also would have read about that in the New York Times article. So we have various entertainment evenings, various Yiddish social clubs and groups, and lots more. You may also have seen Yiddish Australia's various video productions, such as this cartoon of the beloved story Der Rov, was ist gekommen spät zur Kolnidre, which, the voice recording was one of our beautiful Yiddishisten in Melbourne, Danielle Sharak. Yiddish Australia is run by a group of dedicated Yiddish-speaking volunteers in Melbourne for lovers of Yiddish and Yiddish speakers of all ages. Importantly, we'd like to make note that the Yiddish Softbach Australia is co-sponsored by Yiddish-oriented organisations in Melbourne, including Shalom College, the Kadima, the JWAX Cultural Centre, the Penina Zilberman Yiddish Cultural and Educational Fund, and Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization at Monash University. The ACJC, the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization, also hosts Yiddish lectures a few times a year. Okay, so although we don't have a lot of time, we'd like to briefly mention that apart from the many Yiddish organisations that we have in Melbourne, there are also always many different interesting Yiddish projects happening in Melbourne. We'd like to highlight some of these interesting initiatives. So first, Link. This is a new zine published by a young age of 30. The publication features only pieces by people under 30 and in line with Bund's values. There is always Yiddish content in this publication, with past content including articles, reviews, and poetry. Second, there are many Yiddish musicians and bands in Melbourne. So some of you may have heard a little bit as you were arriving onto the plane that we have here. Key singers and musicians such as
Yeah, that's all right. There's nothing there.
Such as Brady, Morotsky, Tommy Kalinsky, and others maintain a tradition of Yiddish song that has been passed down through the generations. You may have heard recent recordings from performers and bands such as Karen Feldman, the Basheva Singers, and Yid. Third, Melbourne is also home to several new Yiddish books. So we'd like to highlight, we might need a light for this one because we can't see it. In particular, the newest work by a group called Die Verborgene Chaliastre, which has taken Yiddish literature and reimagined it in print with translations provided as well as beautiful artwork. So you can see one of their recent and new publications. Which we can't see because there's no light. Maybe we need some light.
Yeah, we'd love some light.
Yeah, we're finished with the slide. That's okay. And they've got a new publication that's about to be released this week. So
there we go.
When we have it, you'll see it
in the light.
Come and have a look in particular. It's amazing.
So as you can see, Yiddish Melbourne is thriving, and this is just really a glimpse, just a taste of the rich community in which we live. We haven't had time to touch on many aspects of the history of our community, including our old newspapers, Yiddish writers, including our talented poet Hinda Burstin that we want to mention. We also haven't had time to touch on the Frum Yiddish-speaking community in Melbourne, but we do want to stress one important thing that was highlighted in Natasha Frost's fantastic article in the New York Times about Yiddish Melbourne. And that is that many people like to use the R words when they talk about Yiddish, revival and Renaissance. And as is the case in many communities around the world, that disregards the work of communities who have lived, breathed, worked and created in Yiddish for years. We are the inheritors of the work of people in our community who have put in that work. And we're very proud to be the next ring in Der Goldene Kette, in the golden chain. The Melbourne Yiddish community has been a vibrant one for many years, and we're so pleased to be able to welcome anybody who's just finding out about it. In the limited time that we have with you today, obviously there's no way we could show you every little part of Yiddish Melbourne, but we hope we've given you just a little taste. And while we might be biased, we'd say that it's tam gan-eydn. So I don't know if there are any questions from people. We know people have asked us all week. It's a shame this talk has been just on Friday. I know a lot of people sat with us at meals and said, can you tell us about Yiddish Melbourne? We've had to say, wait for Friday. So now's the time. If you have questions, we'd love to answer them. We'll start off the back.
Yeah.
The Jewish population of Melbourne in Australia is always growing or declining or stable?
I'm actually not too sure on that question, but I will find out and let you know. I'll try and find out for you. Yeah.
Where is it roughly?
Also not sure of the exact number now, because we have the same issue as every Jewish community around the world. Not everybody notes it in the census, so I will find out the rough number for you. Yeah.
Did Yiddish achieve its popularity in Melbourne because of Holocaust survivors who tended to go there?
Yeah, so interestingly, post-Holocaust, I don't know if anyone knows this, but Melbourne had the highest percentage to population of Holocaust survivors in the world outside the state of Israel. So certainly we would say that that's a part of it. But again, in the specific case of Melbourne, we're really talking about people who came to Melbourne with an experience of organized Jewish life. And I think that certainly contributed to our ability to set up all these organizations that support Yiddish. I will also say one of the really nice things about our community is how well our Yiddish organizations work to support each other. Obviously, you would have noticed they each have their different area. And that's really to make sure that Yiddish as a whole is supported in Melbourne. You know, there's something for everyone in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether the Bund or the Jewish community at large has taken any political stance, like against white Australia. I don't know if that's still a policy there, but it was for many years, and I'm curious whether you folks have any connection in any way trying to politically have a presence there.
In terms of when you say white Australia, do you mean specifically, just so I get the answer to this correct? Policy, right? So immigration policy.
No,
So that is no longer a policy in
I'm
Australia.
curious whether your organization or the Bund ever got involved with the difficulties that Australia is having at large.
Yeah.
But the Jewish community took a stance.
Yeah,
on
so
these
as we were saying in the presentation, the Bund focuses a lot on wider issues. So an example in Australia is the asylum seeker issue that's ongoing in Australia. I won't go into that because I think the focus of today is about Yiddish, but the referendum, which is happening now, which is about giving First Nations people an enshrined voice in the Constitution. So those are all issues that are not specific to Jews, but the Jewish Labour Bund is active in those areas. Yeah. Yeah.
So the Shalom College goes like K through 8?
K through 6. Yeah. Yeah.
How many students are in the whole school?
Yeah, so from the kindergarten to grade 6, there's about 300 students. Obviously that changes every year depending on the numbers, but roughly that's, yeah.
Very expensive to know.
Not compared to other private schools. Yeah.
But there is also continuation.
So we have so we don't have a high school, but we have, as we said, the non-school senior secondary provider entity, which is where they study after school, the high school Yiddish classes. Yeah.
Very two questions. Is the Yiddish that's taught in your school, what's called the flower Yiddish, like?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but we also, this is one of my favorite parts of the grade 5 Yiddish curriculum. We also teach about Yiddish dialects as well. So a lot of them, whilst they're learning Klarsprach, their grandparents or family members might be speaking another dialect. So we do want to expose them to other dialects so that they can communicate with their family members, and also because it's a rich part of Yiddish language and culture.
And is Yiddish, what is the state of Yiddish education in the rest of Australia, not Sydney or some other?
Yeah, so there are religious schools where there would be Yiddish instruction. So down the street from us, for example, are Das. But in terms of secular Yiddish day schools, we're the only ones. Yeah. Yeah, well, in all of the world.
Yeah.
I think there is a school in Canada, but it's not daily. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm a graduate of Yiddishland Parrot School,
Yeah.
but not in Australia.
Right.
So I was intrigued when you said, when I heard it was ill parrots,
E.L. Parrots.
E-E-L.
E.L. Parrots.
Yiddishland Parrots.
Yeah.
Yidland.
Sort of appreciate it.
So in Yiddish, when we say Yud Lamed Peretz's name, we say E.L. Peretz. In English, I.L. Peretz. E.L. Peretz.
It's a E, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
E.L. Peretz.
Secondly, the anthem, I heard the same anthem, but
Yes.
with this somewhat different.
You would have learned La Mizingen, La Mizingen.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
And is there a second verse?
Yeah, so we don't sing the second verse, and in fact, I only learnt about that for Zalman Malatek's birthday when he asked us to record it. He came on Zoom to teach the children. So we just sing the first verse, and with that same tune from the Medem Sanatorium.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, my next question is several, but I'll try to distill it. It all has to do with names.
Mhm.
So Kadima
Yeah.
suggests Zionism, because they use the Hebrew words with the Hebrew pronunciation, even though it's 1905 or something like that.
There's no Yiddish word Kadima.
No, so, you know, but I was curious that they chose that, in the same way as I'm curious that your name is Razel, your name is Einat. It indicates an inclination toward a certain stream of Jewish life. I may be wrong about that. I would think of Einat as Israeli oriented.
Yeah.
Razel, obviously, it was great. So, anyways, okay, so just saying.
just different family backgrounds. I mean, my dad grew up in a house with a very strong Bundist as his father. He was even a president of the Kadima at one time, very involved with the Bund. But my dad went to a Zionist youth movement and made Aliyah. So I was born in Israel, came back straight into Shalom Aleichem kindergarten.
That's what
Yeah.
you want.
But it's not-
Well, there are other
yeah.
people, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There are
I don't
other
think it
people,
has-
there are questions, we have 5 minutes, if you could, and they're here. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Let's move.
Yeah.
All day Yiddish or only have the Yiddish as language and the regular subjects in English?
So it's not all day. That's a good question. So they have Yiddish lessons every day, but we do have other subjects where Yiddish is incorporated into those subjects. So for example, in a music lesson, and they're preparing for the In One Voice Festival, they're learning Yiddish and Hebrew songs. They're not necessarily learning English songs. There's also cross collaboration between the general studies teachers and the Jewish studies teachers. So we try to work together to bring more Yiddish into the other subjects. I taught the planets in Yiddish last year. So we really try to complement what everyone else is doing and work together in that way.
So I'm interested in the evolution of the Bund movement in the US, which has disappeared. And what allowed you to maintain it?
What questions was here Bund disappeared? What allowed Bund survive and thrive in Australia?
So I don't know if I can answer, Sabina could probably answer better about the New York context. In terms of why the Bund in Melbourne succeeded, I do certainly think Skiff as an organization is a big contributor to that, because we have young people that go through this organization and they hit 18 and then they become helper and they're there till 22, all of which on a volunteer basis. And when they leave, they want to keep staying involved, and their way of being involved is through the Bund. So then the young people join the Bund committee, like we saw on the screen, or they come to Bund activities. So I certainly think Skiff is a big contributor to that. But Sabina, as I said, could probably speak more to the New York context.
Going to New York, when Harris was going this, and I went to a Bundesliga summer camp, and 2 people from Australia came in the early 70s and tried to establish a Skiff organization in New York. I visited Melbourne's Yiddish speaking community about 40 years ago as part of a research project I did. And the conclusion I came to was twofold: is the immigration to Melbourne was a much later immigration. The Yiddish community, the Worker Circle, was founded in 1900. And the Yiddish, the Holocaust survivors who came to New York, for example, were competing with an already assimilated Yiddish-speaking population. So it got watered down almost immediately in that respect. And also the later immigration just demographically means that there are a larger number of younger people who grew up with Yiddish in their homes, and you have a generation or 2 difference between the students we have in our Worker Circle school and the young people who are in their school because of the immigration pattern. It's a fascinating community, very welcoming, even though I haven't been there in a long time.
We would welcome you. We would welcome you. I do want to
everybody to make contact with them if you haven't made it to that part of the world.
I do just want to add to what Sabina said. One important point which we didn't speak to very much is geographically, our community is also very close, which contributes to that. So people don't move away for college. Most people stay in Melbourne for college. Most people still live at home when they're 22. So it does mean that they're around the community a lot longer when they're already adults. So that could also be part of that continuity there.
And send their kids to the same schools they went to and the same youth movements they went to. And, yeah.
I do want to just add to what Sabina was saying. Apart from getting in touch and searching online all these organizations, we do appreciate your support always from across the sea. We do feel we are obviously on our own little island, and any way that you can support Yiddish Melvin, whether that be, Shane many times has hopped online for us to talk to our students and share his expertise. Others have done that as well. That's also a great contribution as well to Yiddish Melvin. So in other words, stay connected with us. We'd love to.
Through our English classes.
Yes, live from school. That's right. We are staying very connected. I think Eileen had a question. I don't know if we answered it.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Last question, because then you can ask questions. Yeah.
You have a nucleus of botanists who are Yiddish speaking Jewish people who come to the school,
So we have had students at the school from all levels of religiosity, but they come to the school knowing the secular Jewish approach at the college. But we've certainly had students of all levels of religiosity come. I would say the vast majority of our students not, but we have certainly had some. Yeah.
Thank you. Fascinating program.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.